David Grossman reporting. Now, Simon Jenkins is a former editor of The Standard who now writes for The Guardian, and Rachel Johnson has written for the paper but now has a column in the Mail on Sunday. Simon, before we get stuck in, actually, if you were editing a paper tonight and this was your front page story tomorrow, would you lead with the fact that he has no experience at all, or would you lead with the fact that he's staying on as an MP?
I can't lead with the fact that he's staying on as an MP, but I'm not sure that's totally this year. I have to say I also write occasionally for the Evening Standard, so
of course. So you have a vested interest. He's your new boss.
He's my, I suppose, my new boss, I hope.
And that's the logistical question of whether or not, before we even talk about conflicts of interest, whether or not there are enough hours in the day to edit a newspaper you have edited and to represent the good people of Tatton.
Well, I mean, the Editors' Union will be querying 4 days a week and half a day as well. But come on, editors have been bizarre people throughout history. Before the war, they were all politicians, effectively. I don't think that's a big problem in itself. He's got to organise his day. I'm assuming he'll be a sort of editor-in-chief and someone else will run the paper. You cannot run a paper half a day. But George Osborne's an intelligent man. He's appreciating, you can appreciate that. A much more problematic thing for him, I think, is really whether he can be a poacher in the morning and a gamekeeper in the afternoon. I mean, journalists have gone back and forth, but they haven't done the same job at the same time. And I think it is difficult, it really is, and he's aware of this, I'm sure. It is difficult to, to slam off your friends in the morning and go and talk to them in the afternoon. He is a party politician, and you can do that, 1 year and then be an editor another year, but to do it within the course of 24 hours, I think you'll find it very difficult. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see.
And the conflicts of interest, Rachel, just off the top of my head, what happens if the chief reporter at The Standard comes in with a big scoop about the unfolding Conservative expenses problems and say we've traced this one all the way back to the then Chancellor boss?
I think it's going to raise a big question. It's which is his day job? Is it editing The Standard, or is it being a loyal Tory backbencher? And I suggest that it's probably going to be the former, because
he can't be both.
His constituency in Tatton is being redrawn anyway. It interests me that he's not decided to dump the voters of Tatton already. Evgeny Lebedev has described him as a Londoner through and through. It might be news to them. And it just strikes me that he feels he has more power running a newspaper, however many hours in the day he does so, than he does as a backbencher, where all signs of dissent are stifled by the autocracy of the Tory right, and his passion for the Remain cause and for Europe he's not allowed to give voice to that because he's called an enemy of the people and stamped on. So of course he's had to leave Parliament in order to make these points using a very reflective platform of a big London daily free sheet, and so good for him.
Good for him. You sort of, because it gives him the freedom to say the things he doesn't
also,
have the freedom to say as an MP.
On a selfish perspective, he's saying the things that I don't think enough people are saying, and people are being quelled. Look at all the MPs who actually voted Remain, who then had to vote for Article 50. Dissent is no longer permitted in Parliament. Dissent, luckily, is still permitted in the press.
For now. The other question, of course, that springs to mind, Simon Jenkins, is whether or not there is a bigger game plan. You try and work out what he hopes to get out of this, and you can't help observing that for most people, presumably yourself included, achieving the editor's chair is the end of a process. There's a suspicion this is the beginning of a process, but no one's quite sure what that process is.
I think you're dealing with an intelligent man. He's got a game plan of some sort. We're not privy to it. I think editing a newspaper is more fun than being a backbench MP, and I think he probably thinks that too. But where he's going, we don't know. It's inherently not sustagnable. It has to be said. It's inherently not sustainable.
Riding two horses.
Riding these
How long would you give him?
These particular two horses. But and I'm not going to underestimate this guy. The fact of the matter is, he will be watched very closely for the things that Rachel was mentioning. His own staff are going to be watching him like a hawk. They're going to be teasing him with stories about his friends in Londoners' Diary. I mean, it's going to be hell for him at times. But it won't be dull.
Londoners' Diary, for people outside the capital, is the gossip column that has a very political bent at the best of times, and possibly will have an even more political one now.
I think I have to say, I think what is good news for the Standard is he will not have taken this job without promises of investment and jobs and so on, because without that he will be discredited. So he's got to have been given various understandings, which is going to be good for that newspaper.
But that itself speaks of an understanding of how newspapers work, and I don't think it would be uncharitable to suggest there's not a great deal of evidence to support the idea that he has the vaguest understanding of how newspapers work.
Well, you do an editorship for half a day, you will not be the pucker full-time editor of that newspaper. He's got a good team there. They're very good people working with him. He will be effectively, I think, an editor-in-chief. It's perfectly feasible. It's been done before. It's perfectly feasible in
I was
itself.
thinking more that, as you mentioned, resources and investment, he's not going to know where best to put the money.
Well, he'll have people who tell him. I mean, he will have a very close relationship with Lebedev, the proprietor. That's given. That's the best security any paper can have.
What's in it for him?
What's in it for him is his long-term game plan.
No, for Lebedev.
For Lebedev, he's got a star editor. He's got access to people in power. Things that proprietors always love about owning newspapers.
Not that this is necessarily the most popular angle to adopt, but showing some sympathy for the ordinary journalist now. I sort of, forgive me if I've got my years slightly wrong, but how would you have felt when you were poised to assume the editorship of the Times, and then it was announced that Norman Lamont had got the job?
I'd have been very annoyed.
Yes.
Quite right. I mean,
and someone like you, Rachel, I mean, you might have thrown your hat into the ring for this job or similar, and it turns out that a former Chancellor can come out of nowhere.
James, you're right. If I'd known a few weeks ago that somebody with less experience than the messenger boy on the Brighton Evening Argus was going to take the helm of one of the largest circulation newspapers in the country, I'd have been in there like a rat up a drain pipe. But, you know, there we are. In the old days, journalists aspired to be politicians. In the new world order, the new crazy world we live in, politicians are aspiring to be journalists. So what does that say about the relative power bases of Parliament and the Fourth Estate? I don't know, but it's interesting that he clearly thinks he can have more fun and more influence doing both.
Doing that
He's
job
not actually having to choose at the moment, is he?
No, but
it's the new politics. It really is.
At risk of this list becoming endless, he's also the chairman or the chairperson of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. It's an unpaid position, but I think he's going to scrape by, isn't he, with some of his other remunerations.
We're all in this together. He's in his 5 jobs together.
Yes. £2,700 per person in London spent on transport. It's £201 in Yorkshire. It's £5 in the North East. How is he going to be able to represent the Northern Powerhouse while also, as both Lebedev and him have said today, campaigning for the sort of rights and pleasures of Londoners?
Well, when he was Chancellor, he spoke about the Northern Powerhouse, but he channelled money into London. It's the Southern Powerhouse. He's now running the Southern Powerhouse.
And the North can whistle.
Well, to be fair, I mean,
from his point of view.
From his point of view, you better ask him. I sense he's seen where his future is. It's in London.
Whenever anyone says they're passionate about anything in a statement, you know they're talking through their hat.
Jacob Rees-Mogg has suggested this may be a precursor to a mayoral bid. Does that hold any water for you? No.
That's a new one, but I mean, I'd believe anything at this stage. By the end of this interview, he'll probably be the Director General of the BBC.
I think he might be presenting Newsnight on Monday,
exactly.
So I have to double-check the roster. The 1922 committee, it's supposed to be, of course, a very confidential conclave. It's not really supposed to have any outlets to the outside world, and yet you're going to have the editor of a daily newspaper sitting in it. I mean, can you imagine he's going to be under pressure to bring in scoops? Because if he is, we're going to have all sorts of problems.
Evgeny should sack him if he doesn't.
Exactly. Well, this is it.
I mean, this has happened before. You've had this I mean, Bill Deeds, people like that. You had this very close relationship between editors, chairs and politicians. And in the old days, the editor of the Daily Herald was in and out of the Labour Party office.
But those were the old days, Simon. We've got Leveson now, and press regulation, and all those things.
The old days aren't over yet. And I mean, I just think, I mean, you're right to point it out. I think he's going to have a lot of trouble in that area, largely because people are going to be watching.
And on a personal level, or a sort of blend of the personal and the political, what about negative stories regarding David Cameron or some of his other political allies? Could you, as a former editor, can you foresee enormous tensions if the troops are somehow prevented from bringing their stories to the paper?
No, they won't be. They'll be encouraged to do so by the prospect of possibly embarrassing their editor. I mean, I think, I mean, the internal dynamics of a newspaper are changed when the editor is in that sort of position. Now, I just assume George Osborne knows what he's doing. But there will be one after another embarrassment for him. I mean, editors have it anyway. They have their friends in the gossip column.
But you speak so casually because you're so immersed in that world. He's just not. Do you have any fears at all for his sort of well-being?
If he's not, he's got a problem, all right? I mean, that's all one can say at this stage.
When will we be able to judge whether it's been a success or not, Rachel Johnson?
Well, it's difficult with a standard because you haven't really got the normal levers. You can't see the circulation falling. If advertising craters or something like that, or, I don't know, all the staff leave en masse.
Watch this space.
But you've got no circulation. You give the paper away. You give away as many copies as you like.
Yeah.
Simon Jenkins, Rachel Johnson, many thanks indeed.